Muscular tissue is a very specialized type of tissue that has the unique ability to contract, and it does this when it receives a stimulus from somewhere else, either the nervous system, possibly a different organ, some sort of physical force. So when we get into our chapter on muscles, we'll talk a lot more about muscular tissue. Right now, we want to learn to identify and distinguish between the three types of muscular tissue: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. Starting with skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle is composed of very long, thin cells. These cells are called muscle fibers. Skeletal muscle has the function of being attached to bones and to provide the force that allows movement. We can identify skeletal muscle for a couple of different ways. With skeletal muscle, so you can see how there's a boundary here and here. That is showing you different cells. So notice these cells are multinucleated, lots of nuclei in one cell. And your screen is not out of focus. The skeletal muscle is striped. It's what we call striated. So if we're comparing this tissue type to other tissue types we're currently learning, this can be confused with dense, regular connective tissue. So you want to make sure you learn how to look for those striations and those perfect lines that separate the different fibers or muscle cells. An important note on function: skeletal muscle is voluntary, which means skeletal muscle moves when we tell it to. That should be pretty obvious to you. You don't typically just start walking around in the middle of the day or kicking your leg unless you're actually thinking about it. The next muscular tissue is cardiac muscle. So cardiac muscle obviously is found within the cardiovascular system in the heart. Cardiac muscle is still striped, so we still see the striations, but notice how every now and then we have a really dark stripe. That dark stripe is called an intercalated disc, and that's one of the easiest ways to distinguish this from skeletal muscle, which is also striped. Also, your muscle fibers or muscle cells aren't perfectly in line, so they're going to look more like this. A note on function: you probably know cardiac muscle is involuntary. We don't have to sit around and think and tell our heart to beat. It just knows to do that. Our last tissue type in this section is smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is not striated or striped. This is one of the most commonly missed tissue types when students are asked to identify different types of tissues. Again, this can look a lot like dense regular connective tissue. So you still want to look for the nice muscle cells. So these are what we call spindle shaped. And so if I can draw that, it's kind of more elongated and then closes down on itself. You're going to have one nucleus in the very center. So very different from your skeletal muscle. It's not striped. You have spindle-shaped cells instead of long cells. You have one nucleus per cell. And this, function-wise, is also involuntary. We have smooth muscle in the walls of all of our internal organs. So again, we don't have to tell those to contract. They know to do so.